Intel versus AMD, who is stronger in which area? But first, a short introduction to help you understand. The lithography determines the size of the CPU, or more precisely the size of the transistors. This is very simplified. It would be far too complicated to explain this in detail. Basically, you can remember the following: smaller is better. All CPUs and GPUs have these specifications. In the past, all manufacturers specified the lithography in nanomillimeters, which is also correct. However, Intel had to remove the nanomillimeter specifications and replace them with its own specifications. This was done for the obvious reason that it is bad for business and customers should not see the nanomillimeter specifications. With a smaller lithography, more transistors can be accommodated on the same chip surface. More transistors means more computing power and lower power consumption. This is also a very simple description. If you want to find out more, you should visit Wikipedia. The P-cores are the CPU cores that have always existed. Many believe that the E-core cores were newly invented by Intel. Yes and no. The first E-core cores saw the light of day in 2008 in the Intel Atom series. These were the very first CPU chips that used very little power, which was a huge achievement by Intel that no one had recognized. At that time, nobody was interested in low-power CPUs. Even later, there was very little interest in these incredibly brilliant CPUs. An example from 2016, the Atom X5Z 8350 with 14 nanomillimeters has 4 cores with a maximum of 1.44 GHz. When Windows is running and there is nothing to do, the Atom requires just 0.7 watts including graphics. It can consume a maximum of up to 2 watts of energy. A notebook with this CPU can achieve a pure video runtime of up to 9 hours. And these CPUs do not need a fan. Intel develops and produces all CPUs itself. Unfortunately, this also results in higher costs as a factory with the appropriate machines is required. These machines are only designed for lithography. This is one reason why Intel cannot offer the latest technology. AMD, on the other hand, does the same as NVIDIA. They develop the CPU and have it produced by TSMC. TSMC produces semiconductor chips for companies such as AMD, Apple, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, Conexant, Marvell, Bayer, and Broadcom. Intel and AMD have CPUs with and without an integrated GPU. An integrated GPU in the CPU can have advantages. It is cheaper and completely sufficient for most applications and simple video games. Unfortunately, there is also a disadvantage. The heat development is much greater because the CPU and GPU are on one chip. Cooling is more difficult here. Intel introduced E-cores on October 27, 2021, which was Intel's last act of desperation. Most people saw this as progress, but in reality they wanted to hide their outdated technology to catch up with AMD one last time and even be slightly faster in the highest CPU class. Unfortunately, this solution also came with the first serious problems. There were constant crashes under Windows 10 and older Windows systems. In some cases, certain applications no longer ran at all. The solution was Windows 11, probably the most hated Windows version in the world. But even here, certain programs wouldn't run. It was even worse for gamers who like to buy new hardware. Certain games also stopped working thanks to Intel. The basic idea with the E-core is not bad, but unfortunately it doesn't work. The energy-saving cores don't harmonize with the P-core. The feedback is too slow. You can overclock the E-cores, but that makes the whole thing pointless. P-cores can also be operated very energy efficiently. AMD will do without E-cores for the time being, or rather, they don't need them. It is unclear whether Intel will let the E-cores disappear again. Perhaps when they come up with the next lithography series. Until then, Intel needs the E-cores to compensate for the performance deficit. AMD has been focusing on advanced technology for some time now, just as Intel once did. More performance through a new lithography and then an improved design. Intel cannot do this, they still rely on the very old lithography series. Intel CPUs get much hotter than those from AMD. This has to do with the old lithography. The only way to reduce the heat would be to offer less CPU power, but then nobody wants to buy Intel CPUs anymore. Due to the outdated technology that Intel uses, you lose out in all areas. This is becoming increasingly important, especially for notebook users and computer gamers. The CPUs require almost twice as much power as those from AMD. This increases the temperature, which in turn requires more cooling and more power consumption. As a notebook user, this is extremely tragic. The devices get extremely hot and the battery life is, to put it mildly, just bad. For real computer gamers, this is a very big problem as they need full power for hours on end and are barely able to cool the CPU. Of course, excellent cooling costs a lot of money. All in all, if you have an Intel CPU, you lose all along the line, including the additional costs that arise. Intel and AMD produce dedicated graphics cards. These graphics cards are very popular with computer gamers, graphic designers, 3D development software, 3D applications, cryptominers, and AI applications. Anyone who needs high graphics performance or computing power cannot do without them. Another advantage of a dedicated graphics card is that it has its own cooling system. This makes it easier to dissipate heat than just using a cooling system on the CPU. Intel and AMD have their GPUs produced by TSMC. Intel and AMD are following the same path here, progress through a new lithography series. In addition, the GPU design has to be optimized and improved again and again. In the end, it's about two factors: performance regardless of power consumption and minimal power consumption in normal desktop mode. Intel GPUs are slightly hotter than those from AMD. This has to do with the somewhat older lithography and the experience in the graphics card sector, which Intel still has to acquire. Intel graphics cards are not quite as fast and energy efficient as those from AMD, but Intel is also still relatively new in the high-end GPU segment and still lacks experience. Attention! If you don't want to have any problems or are a simple consumer, then don't buy a PC or notebook with an Intel processor for the next few years. Unfortunately, Intel played down the problems with their CPUs for a very long time and hardly reacted. At that time, Intel was still replacing the CPUs under warranty, but as more and more people got in touch with Intel, the computer gamer scene put the problem in the spotlight. First, Intel blamed all the other components, then the RAM, then the BIOS. This left a bland taste and a very bad impression on customers. Even the die-hard Intel fans were horrified. However, it should also be noted that since 2019, many people who were familiar with the matter knew that Intel would have more and more problems and would fall behind. By this time, many had already abandoned the sinking ship and switched to AMD. Intel had not made any significant progress in the CPU sector before 2019. When Intel had no other excuses, they had to make the admission, which has serious consequences for Intel. Intel cannot afford to replace all CPUs, so they provided a fix that clocks the CPU down so far that it can no longer be damaged. Unfortunately, with this fix comes a big performance loss. All CPUs that are already in use are and remain damaged. It may well be that this is the end for Intel. Customer confidence has been lost and the frustration runs deep. Perhaps Intel will also be held responsible by the American government, unless the state gives away money again. Mel out. The following is a video excerpt from a YouTuber from Germany. You can get a new one if you want. This is the second one. I don't want to set up my PC again. I just want to stream. Yes, I do that too. AMD is better. I do that too. I'm right on it. I'm planning something with AMD right now. I would love to do some advertising for AMD. I'll give you the discount. I don't give a shit. Simply because I'm so fucked up about Intel.
Electricity into this area and it burns out that building and destroys it permanently, right? Imagine that. Because that's exactly what's happening.
That's how it is for me.
Yeah, and it's gone forever. It's broken forever. And your CPU?
This is already my second PC, and even if the update comes, the processor is already broken. Anyone with a 13 and 14 generation Intel is fucked. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.